see. Orange Audubon is pleased to have agronomist, beekeeper, and reptile expert Chris Stalder as our November speaker. We'll be able to view some non-venomous local species as up close and personal as our comfort level allows. We will also become familiar with our 4 local venomous species and learn about some of the important medical applications and uses for snake venoms. Please help me welcome Chris and friends.
Thank you, Terry. I've always been fascinated with snakes because they're mysterious. Very often they're hiding because there's so many wild animals that would love to eat them. So usually you only see them when they come out to find food or water or to go on mating excursions to find mates. And I have here an 18-year-old Florida king snake. Now all snakes have an egg-laying mechanism in their system, but some hold the eggs full term, and they have a live birth, so the babies are fully formed and ready to go. But some snakes have adapted to laying eggs earlier and having them incubate per se, but they just find the right location to deposit them. And very often in the wild in Florida, they will use the downed state tree, the sable palmettos. There's a lot of fiber inside of those trunks. It's not really a tree, it's a grass plant, and there's all this fiber inside. And multiple snakes will very often lay in the same downed tree log of one of our state trees, which isn't a tree. So I'm pictured in the PowerPoint presentation with our most dangerous venomous snake, the eastern diamondback rattlesnake. It doesn't have the strongest venom drop for drop of Florida venomous snakes. The coral snake is much stronger, and it's a neurotoxin. The pit vipers, we have 5 of them in Florida, and the only member of the cobra family is the eastern coral snake. So in the whole state we have 6 venomous species. Here in central Florida we only have 4 of them, and headed south. And we'll talk more about the ones that are out of our range further north. But the eastern diamondback rattlesnake can grow to be a large size, and because it can deliver a lot of venom, it's considered the most dangerous snake in Florida. Now, if you ever get a snake bite, certainly don't try to capture the animal, but of course if it's biting you, you probably disturbed it with your hands or your feet, and hopefully you've got a good look at it when it's biting you and to identify it. But you don't need to collect the snake and to bring it into the hospital or whatever, and seek the emergency room nearest you as soon as possible, because they can't reverse the effects of the venom, but they can stop it from progressing with the antidote, the antivenom. And that's very important to help you from having tissue damage in the case of the pit vipers, and neurological damage in the case of the coral snake. So, with the coral snake, the neurotoxins are a different story entirely, because the way they affect your body, and they go into the lymph system, and then they go into the rest of the body, and we'll talk more about that when we look at the coral snake. But the eastern diamondback is considered the most advanced snake in the world for the way it injects its venom. It has fangs in the front of its mouth, and they are replaced regularly. They shed their fangs, so they don't just get 2 teeth for life. They're like sharks. They keep getting new teeth as they live, and they will shed them in the animals that they bite, and they are retractable, so they can swing out and be longer. With the coral snake, it's tiny fixed fangs in the front of the mouth, but with the pit vipers, they're retractable, so they can be much longer. And is considered the most advanced delivery system of venom because they have the heat sensing pits as well. They're near the nostrils, but they can see in infrared, and they can see the size and the heat of the animal that's near them to decide whether or not to strike at it. And the tongue can detect chemical differences in the air. And does anybody know why there are two tines, why there's a fork at the end of the tongue? If you do, raise your hand and let me know what you think. Okay. Yes, sir.
They can sense direction.
Absolutely. It's a directional, because on the roof of their mouth is an organ called the Jacobson's organ, which detects tiny bits of chemicals in the atmosphere. And they can trace the strength of those chemicals in the air with the two tines that strike the roof of their mouth, and they will be able to navigate in the direction where they want to go, to where the scent is stronger, the chemical scent. And what they do is they can be at night or in the day, just they're ambush predators, the eastern diamondbacks. They will sit and wait along a rabbit trail or a rodent trail, and when the animal comes by, running along its trail, they will quick strike in less than a split second. It's very quick. And they will inject the venom into the animal, and then they will actually follow their own venom trail, sensing the scent of their own venom with their tongue, and follow that scent. And then when they usually come up to the animal, it has been subdued by the effects of the venom, and then that will put it in a position so there's no confrontation at all between the predator and the prey. With a constrictor like the Florida king snake that I've got in my hand, it has to put the most vulnerable part of its body on its prey item and hold it with that most vulnerable head and dispatch the animal or lose if there's a bad fight. They may not win the battle. But with the advanced delivery system of the venom of the diamondback and the other pit vipers, they don't need to do that. It's just amazing how advanced they are. The most advanced snake in the world we have right here, the pit vipers. And this can grow to be the largest venomous snake in North America. And we also have the dusky pygmy rattlesnake, which is like the smallest representative of the rattlesnakes here in Florida. Okay, this is another picture of the eastern diamondbacks. In the wild, they eat rabbits or squirrels or rodents or whatever they can find that's warm-blooded and moving around. That's the right size. And they can detect the size. It's amazing with the infrared vision with their pits. I mean, they were much more advanced than we ever knew about until, we discovered doing infrared for the military. So this one is a fully grown eastern diamondback, about 5 feet long. There are lots of snake stories. A lot of people say, oh, I saw a diamondback. It was crossing both lanes of traffic on a 2-lane road. That's a fish story, or a wild exaggeration snake story. But at the Reptile World Serpentarium, where I did my venomous hours to get my license to relocate venomous snakes, they have only had one 6-foot eastern diamondback in all the years, and they've had thousands of eastern diamondbacks brought in. So, it's possible there might have been one 8-foot, but when an animal's dead, you can stretch it out more than it would be stretched in life. And same goes with the skins. If it shed its skin, or if the skin is actually cut off the animal and put on a board, it can be stretched and not be a reliable indicator of the size. The rattle is a very conspicuous thing, and this one has an amazing rattle. And everybody wonders, well, if you count the rattles, the segments on the rattle, can you tell the age of the snake? That's a very common question that we get. And the very tip of the rattle is the button. And the eastern diamondbacks, as well as all the other pit vipers in Florida, they come out of the female fully formed, and they have, the tip is a button. And then the next one after it sheds is called a segment. So they will add a segment every time they shed, but it depends upon the environment and the appetite of the individual snake and how well they are at capturing food in the environments. So when they need a new skin, they will grow out of the old one and shed the whole skin, which is a remarkable thing. I mean, it would be wonderful if people could do that, because we'd always have perfect baby skin. We'd get rid of all the problems. And sometimes there will be ticks that will be embedded too deep that won't come off with a shed, but all sorts of other parasites and other things, problems are removed with the shed of the skin. And so this one has a button plus 27 segments. So in a given year, an eastern diamondback may shed like 4 times, depending upon its diet or whatever. So this individual is probably about 6.5, 7 years old. And here we come to the smallest representative of the pit viper family here in Florida. And this one is responsible for the most bites in Florida. It's not considered a big risk problem, but you certainly should seek medical attention right away. Because of the hemotoxins of the pit vipers, they start destroying blood and tissue. They have anticoagulants and all sorts of other things going on with all sorts of complicated proteins. And it's amazing, the pharmacy of the snake venoms, and they're so different from each other. And even in the same population, you can have individual with different strengths of venoms and things, and different populations in different areas will also have different components to the venoms for adaptations, I imagine, to help them immobilize their prey of choice or whatever's available in the environment. So the dusky pygmy rattlesnake, you can see a tiny little rattle right there. It's got like 4 segments. Now, Terry Farrell did a study at Stetson University, and I was lucky enough to hear his presentation years ago at the Central Florida Herpetological Society when I was secretary there in 2007 and 8. And he studied these animals extensively for 10 years, and there can be populations of about 24 individuals per acre in prime habitat. There can be lots of these little pygmy rattlesnakes around. And he had a location near the St. Johns River that was very populated that he studied, and he discovered that unlike the myth that most people have told, that snakes aren't good mothers, they don't care for their young, they just go on their own way once they drop their young or their eggs. Well, that's not the case. The mothers actually display different behaviors when they have young around them, and the smart ones stay close to their moms. They will actually have more defensive behavior from other animals when they have young around. And the young that are smart stay close to mama to get that added protection while they're developing. And again, they are actually fully formed when they come out of their mom. The identifying characteristic for the dusky pygmy rattlesnake is usually that rust color stripe that runs down the length of the body. But they can be almost completely black, and I've seen individuals that have very much white backgrounds. So when you're looking in a field guide at snakes, you'll get a picture or 2 of each species, but it really doesn't tell you much about all the variation in between. And of course there can be albinism, but it's very rare in the wild, but it occurs. And there can be completely melanistic individuals, completely dark, and everything in between. The Florida cottonmouth. I get a lot of snake calls. I'm with a group called Snakes Alive No-Kill Relocation Service that Howard Riley runs out of Plymouth, Florida. And he runs it for the 6-county area. When fire people, fire departments and police get calls, they very often route those calls and dispatch them to him. And I'm in the top of his list because I've got my venomous reptile license and can legally relocate because I keep it up with Fish and Game. But whenever anybody finds a snake in their pool, they immediately think it's a cottonmouth, and I've taken garter snakes out of pools. And a lot of Florida water snakes. There's so many non-venomous water snakes in Florida. Now the cottonmouth, it doesn't have to be around water. I mean, I've found them upland and people's mulch around their homes, and the most remarkable snake call I went on for a cottonmouth was out at the Blue Heron Resort off of 535 near Disney. A security guard had correctly identified the cottonmouth, and it was on the 2nd floor of the parking garage. And I got the call after 1 o'clock in the morning, and you know the Disney bars are open till 3 in the morning. And all those tourists, they're very often wearing sandals, and if somebody had stepped on that venomous snake in the parking garage when they got out of their car, they would have gotten a venomous bite. Now, venomous snakes like to save their venom for the prey item. They don't really want to bite us or anything they can't eat. But if you put physical pressure, if you pinch a snake or step on one or grab it, they're going to give you a wet bite. But very often when they strike, and sometimes when they bite, they'll give you a dry bite. Now the adults can give you a dry bite, but the babies don't have control over the musculature, over the venom gland, so they pretty much just spew venom because they haven't learned to give a dry bite yet. But yeah, that was the most remarkable cottonmouth. And there was a pond not far from the parking garage and the resort, and what people don't realize is when they have lights on at night, they're creating a food chain. The lights attract the insects, and the insects attract the frogs, and the frogs attract the snakes. So all I can figure is a frog must have just kept hopping up this ramp to the 2nd level of the parking garage to get that snake up to that level. Yeah. And it must have swallowed the frog finally and just relaxed and stayed there. Because the security guard, it took me close to an hour to get out there when she called. And it was still there, she was watching it. But she correctly identified it, it was a cottonmouth. And quite a surprise on the 2nd floor of the parking garage. Now very often, the young of certain species will not look anything like the adults. And very often we get calls in Central Florida, people say, oh, I found a copperhead. It's in my yard, or I saw it down by the lake or whatever. Well, the young of the cottonmouth does appear brightly colored and can be very easily misidentified with a copperhead, which in Florida, they only live up around the Apalachicola River basin and the woodlands in that area and further north, in the Big Bend area and further north. But this is a juvenile cottonmouth. And the adult individuals can have a green hue, or they can be all black, or they can have some light coloration. And I have seen albinism in cottonmouths too, but it's very rare. And then the young, though, are very brightly colored and conspicuous. And very often people confuse the banded water snake, which is also known as the Florida water snake, which we have the non-venomous one here to see in a few minutes. They'll confuse that with the venomous cottonmouth. But the cottonmouth is much more heavily bodied, and a lot of snakes will puff themselves up and when they feel threatened, and they'll flatten their heads to make it look more triangular like they're a venomous snake, and they'll shake their tails, even though they don't have a rattle. If they're in the leaves or whatever, it'll sound like rattle. They have all sorts of threat displays to keep a would-be predator from eating them. But this is the juvenile cottonmouth.